So if you go to, yeah. So if you click on it, and then I should get a notification that you've joined. 1 second. Try say hello. Yeah. Now you should see something, Dad. Something should come up, and it should say request to join. No, 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 no. 2 seconds. I was just trying to teach my dad how to go on Instagram. They should be. 1 second. There we go. That's it. All good?
Right.
All right, sorted. So, Dad, just tilt it up so everyone can see your face.
Sorry, say again?
So everyone can see your face. That's it, that's it.
Hang on. Oh, I haven't got a thing in between. I think I'm right, idiot.
You want that one?
No.
That's it.
I'm going to have to hold it. I'll hold it. I'll hold it. I'll hold it.
All right, sweet. So, Dad, what I'll do first is I'll introduce you and just correct me if I'm wrong, all right? Yeah, all right,
Yeah.
cool. So, Dad, you joined the police in, what, the mid to late 80s?
87.
87. So, around about that time, we had what? We had the Brixton riots in 81, the New Crossfires. It was
Yeah.
a period of time of quite a lot of conflict between the public and the police. We also had a economic downturn at the time, which must have created quite a lot of tension.
Yeah. I mean, the riots finished, I think, in 84, 85. And before then, things could only be described as bad.
In what sense?
Well, you had the economic side of it. You had a lot of poverty. I mean, you kids don't know how good you've got it now. Trust me. But it was
Until you lot bought up all the
it
properties.
was a lot of poverty.
Until you lot bought up all the properties.
That's true. That's true.
So, first of all, what inspired you to join the police? Why did you feel it was your call to go into the police force?
Well, it was my dad. It was plain and simple. A very short episode. My dad said, join the police. I said, no way. I went to school the next day and we had a careers officer come in. And the careers officer said, what do you want to do for when you leave school? And I just parroted what my dad said. Said, I want to join the police. And the whole school said, no, you can't. So I decided to join the police. It was almost like, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It was as simple as that. I've never planned to join the police. It wasn't on my radar until that day.
And would you say that you saw the police force change whilst you were in it during your 30-year career?
It's massive change. The police force that you see now is completely different to the police force in 1987. Completely.
And what sense?
I mean, well, it was brutal. It could be described as brutal in 87 and the early 80s compared to now. But I think what's difficult is when people say, oh yeah, but in my time it was far worse. And I don't think anyone who's in their 30s now is interested in what it was like in 87. They just want it to be better now. But but a lot of the behaviour that is unacceptable was completely open, and no one hid it back then.
Did you have much of a depiction or much of an experience with the police before you joined?
Elliot, I've been arrested 3 times before I joined the police. Stopped numerous times. Growing up in Woolwich, Plumstead, if you came into contact with the police, it wasn't going to be a happy experience. So, yeah, which was what put a lot of people off.
And would you say that there was also a racialized element to the divide, or to the way that the police were seen?
Well, but you've got to bear in mind, in the late 70s, early 80s, the racial tension between the police and the community, and to be honest with you, working class people, was very high. It was very high. And the code of conduct, the code of behaviour, it wasn't written down before, I think, 1984, when Pace came in, 1986, 84.
Do you think that sometimes the line between classism and racism, or having a classist view and a racialized view, do you sometimes think that that's a blurred line that often, yeah, go on.
Well, I think you said it to me once. You said that poor white men have got more in common with poor black men than they have with rich people. So I think a lot of the problems that the police encounter and the public encounter is to do with class as much as race, but class is a big element. And
yeah, go on.
And poverty.
I've had quite a few questions from people who, and a lot of them want me to ask you specific questions. I'm just going to start to read some of them out, if that's all right. One of my patients who's a police officer, and Patience is a police officer. In fact, I treat quite a few police officers, and a lot of the time they feel conflicted because they view the police as being very different to how it was in, say, the 80s and the 90s. And a lot of them will try their hardest to take out their own bias from the situation, yet they are completely accused of being biased. Being that we have, for example, statistics show that if you're black, that you're 8 times more likely to be stop and searched, and the police are more likely to use force if they do arrest you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on the role you're in, I suppose. And I mean, most arrests don't need any force at all. So if you're a frontline police officer and you're dealing with domestic disputes, assault through drink, and minor violent crime, I'd describe that as, the force that you're going to have to use should be minimal, but you're going to have to use it. And depending on the circumstances, you're going to be judged quite harshly if it's seen that you've gone over the top. And that's a difficult thing to do. It is difficult.
How do you conclude? So this question is from Edward McCarthy. How would you conclude as to what is reasonable force and what are the guidelines?
Right. Reasonable force, it can only be, you can only judge it on the incident you're dealing with. Now, I would always use the minimum amount of force that's needed. But if an onlooker was watching, they might think that you're going over the top. So I suppose the reasonable element is down to a subjective judgment on what you would use to subdue somebody or the person that asked the question. It's a difficult one to quantify because, well, put it this way, if me and you try to restrain somebody, we should be able to restrain the average person without injuring them. That kind of answers it. You don't need to be suffocating people, making people unconscious or breaking limbs to restrain somebody. And if that happens, something's wrong.
Now, just because it links quite nicely into this, how would you, because obviously using reasonable force under British law seems completely different to what reasonable force is under American law. So how would you describe the parallels between British policing and American policing?
Well, the American, America was built on violence. It's a violent place. We don't have guns, they have guns. The American police force, if you describe it, you'd be hard pushed to describe it as a police force as we know it. They're more like a paramilitary organisation than a police force. The psychology is completely different between a British bobby or a British police officer and an American police officer. I don't think they really care if during the course of their duty, whether you're injured or not, or whether you're shot or not. Whereas if you were to give us credit where it's due, most of the time we do.
There's a call in America more loudly than England to defund the police. So to basically take money out of the and to put it in community. No. Okay, so tell me what you think about that.
No. You can't defund the police. You can't. No city could. I don't think a city could exist if the police overnight disappeared.
What do you think would happen?
I think you'd have anarchy. You can't not have a police service, no matter how bad it is. Change it, but don't get rid of it.
What do you? And what do you think about those police officers who? I'll read out Kelly's. So Kelly's, like I said, one of my patients. She's a police officer. So I'll just read out the whole thing that I've written. So Kelly is very enthusiastic about fair policing, but she is finding increasing internal conflict. This is because she holds herself accountable to be fair as possible, but receives regular accusations that the police is institutionally racist. What are your thoughts?
Tell Kelly to keep doing what she's doing. Stay fair. Stay objective. The police force that was described as institutionally racist during the Macpherson report, during the 80s and 90s, it's a completely different service now. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm its biggest critic, but I couldn't, and I might be biased, I couldn't hand on heart and say now in 2020 that the police as an institution is designed to be biased against groups of people. If you're being objective, you'd have to say the police service is trying.
So would you?
It's under the microscope.
Yeah, go on.
It's under the microscope, but it is trying. And I know social media you get a lot of clips where the police are seen in a bad light. But I would hope, and I do believe, that things have changed for the better. But it is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. To tell Kelly, keep staying fair-minded.
No problem. So I had a question from Faye. So Faye asks, does defund refer to, i.e. not giving military-grade weapons and increased funding for social services? So once again, what Faye is asking is as to whether or not some communities are over-policed, in your opinion, and do you think that the money that is put into the police force could be spent in maybe more social care or community, more uplifting community incentives?
I think it's got to be both, because you can't cure one without the other. And I think, I mean, I'm not going to. You have to have social justice for people, but you have to have the police service. They work hand in hand. It's almost like a social contract to me. And I wouldn't divide one against the other. I'd say give as much to both as you can.
Dad, when you hear the term, yeah, 100%. When you hear the term black on black violence, what do you think? What comes to mind? Or
I wish it didn't exist, to be honest with you, because it is just crime. And I've never heard. When I was in the police service, I argued with a couple of my governors, saying I've never heard a term white on white crime in any description. Football hooliganism was never described as white on white crime. And when you describe black on black crime, what it does, it adds a racial element to it, which I don't like. But that could be being...
No, I'd agree. And I think, do you think that, okay, would you say that you see more violent crime in more impoverished areas or in in wealthier areas?
Well, when I was growing up, Elliot, in the 70s, the most violent crime came from football grounds. And you've got a whole raft of society that's going to watch football. You had middle-class people, bankers, who were going to football games every week for a tear-up. I think obviously there are lots of crimes that are linked to poverty, but I wouldn't try and stick a certain crime on a certain group of people.
Do you think there's a reason why crime is viewed a lot of the time as having a racialized element to it? Do you think that there's a reason why black on black crime? Okay,
yeah, because people like to demonize. They like to look on certain groups as being either more violent, more crime ridden, more than them. But in the police, I mean, in wealthy parts of London, even today, you go to pubs on a Saturday night and you've got wealthy people through drink involved in violent crime. But it's not viewed the same.
And is that because of blame, or is that because it's way? Like, why is that, do you think?
Well, I think depending on where you come from and what you speak like, especially, will depend on how you're judged when it comes to crime. That's just, I think that's an unarguable fact. So if you talk with a working class accent, you could be black, Asian, but class, again, for me, comes into it, rather than if you're very well spoken and you're expected to do things in life, your crime will be judged differently. Not just by the police, by the courts and by normal people. There's more sympathy. There's more sympathy for rich people when they get involved in a tear-up than there is.
Yeah, 100%. Would you, if you were to, I suppose, create a strategy to reduce violent crime, what would that strategy involve?
I don't know. Do you know what, Elliot? I just think people are so angry. Some people, they live in their life, they're just so angry all the time, and I don't think they know what they're angry at.
Well, God, can you have a guess as to why?
So, you know, I can.
Can you?
Well, I think the media, the things they watch, the things they read, people, they say that they wake up, and some people they're just really angry over a stupid statue being pulled down in Bristol. They get really angry about it, and you think, why are you so angry? Just chill out. Just calm down. But some people, it's like they're living in permanent anger.
And do you think that's changed at all? Would you say that since you've seen the development of social media and more news channels and I suppose more bespoke news, people can watch news which fits maybe their own internal bias, do you think that you've noticed a change in people's behaviour or attitude over, say, the last 30 years?
Social media is a brilliant thing. It's a wonderful thing. If we had this when we were kids, I don't know what my generation would be like. But there's an element of it that can Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It's almost inviting you to log on and get angry. So I think a lot of social media. I think a lot of people would be better off if they just turned it off for large chunks of their time, I think. But I'm no expert, Elliot.
Yes. I know, I can tell. I can tell by how much trouble you have in logging on. Dad, do you think that being black and British has changed from, say, Nana's generation to your generation and then to my generation? Do you think that there are trends that have emerged?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing for me that comes off the top of my head is when we were growing up, we wanted to be British, but we never felt British. Whereas I feel like your generation and younger, they feel that they belong. They're British. Whereas my generation quite felt like we belonged.
That's interesting you say that, because with the I think, and it's partly because society has become so more transparent, so much more transparent, that there's a lot of members of, say, my generation, including myself and including Jordan. Actually, I spoke to Jordan about this the other day, and she feels increasingly alienated because of her ethnic background, or her Jamaican or Afrocentric or African heritage. It's almost like I understand what you're saying, but maybe it's because the media now is also all encompassing. Yes, 100% with the protests around George Floyd. You there, Dad?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you, but you're going
Okay.
slow.
With the protests around George Floyd, and with I suppose, the counter culture around the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw more and more individuals voicing their opinions as to why essentially black people standing up for certain rights or certain equality was wrong. So, I mean, but then once again, I can come back and say I understand what you're saying. When you say you never felt British growing up, why was that? Was it because it was overt, the racism was overt when you were growing up?
It was overt. It was in your face. You were told by certain groups like the National Front, go home. It was on the telly. There were marches. Bearing in mind, my parents came from Jamaica to here. But now, I would advise your generation, because you ain't going nowhere. This is your country. I would advise you to embrace your Britishness. Don't forget your heritage or your culture, but you are as British. You're not leaving here to go and live anywhere else. You belong. This is all of our country. You're of mixed race. Half of you is through your mum, you're Italian or whatever, the European roots. If I was your age and for your kids' age, I would embrace being British. It's not perfect, but it's yours.
Do you think that society has become increasingly secular, in the sense that, how can I put this? Because obviously you're talking about becoming more involved in British society or British culture, but sometimes it feels like it's harder to do that because of how secular things are becoming. It's almost like you're either Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. You're either left wing or you're right wing. You're rich or
yeah. Well, it is hard, but I'd advise you all to do it because you're not going anywhere. So that's a burden you're going to have to get. You're going to have to get over it. People are going to have to find the backbone to say, "Look, I'm British. We're here," because you're not going anywhere.
Have you seen, over your career, did you see more people of ethnic minority joining the police?
I still think it's quite low, but more have joined recently. But I mean, if you look at the police force of, say, London and Gravesend, say, there should be more. There should be a lot more people joining.
What?
I've always argued.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, despite the hurdles and how hard it might be because of your ethnicity, still join.
Why do you think there is a bit of a lag for ethnic minorities to join the police?
Because you're joining an environment that mentally is going to test you. It's not a job for everybody. You've got to have the right personality, the right humour. You've got to have something psychological that enables you to do your 30 or 35 years. In the police force, Elliot, no one phones you when they're having a good time. No one phones you when they're having a party. It's, "Oh, Mr. Police Officer, come, we're having a really good..." People phone you when life's shit. That's where you're meeting people, where they're stressed up and it's constant. So you'd have to be... You have to be of a certain personality to do that.
And what were your experiences of racism within the police from your colleagues and peers?
What, from when I joined? Yeah, I mean, I would say it's what most people would say. The N-word was common. I mean, that one incident where I mean, I don't think I've ever told you that me and my friend, and we were friends, were driving along in a police car in Peckham, and he just lost himself and used the N-word. So, and if you were standing there watching, you'd see me punch him in a police car that's rolling along Peckham High Street, and we're having a fight in the police car. Now, looking back, it's funny. You know, you've got to laugh. But we're still friends, strangely enough.
Have you changed them?
So it's... People do change. People do change. If you put people in an environment where there's enough people who are of like-mindedness, people will change. To fit in, people will change. And that's why I'd say people have to join. People have to get involved. Because you can't end what people think, but you can change. And people will change. You put enough people in a room or in an environment with people who are different to them, they will change.
And what you're saying is that you think it's down to the influx of more ethnic minorities into the police to create an institution which represents everyone.
And it's not just the police, Elliot, because people have got more diverse friends now. If you've got friends who are different to you, that will change you if you're in the police. And I think, especially in southern England, London especially, people are so much more mixed. If the people from those areas join the police, you've got a better police force.
Understand. Do you think that there are still steps to be taken to reduce racial biases within the police? And if so, what are they? Do you think that there should be do you think that the police should still be taking steps or making steps to reduce racial biases? And if so, what do you think they are?
I don't know. I don't know. The racial, I think people know when they're acting in a certain way, and that change comes from within. When you critically think about yourself or what you're doing, which is a difficult thing to do constantly, where you're critically thinking, why am I making this judgment? And again, that to me comes back to, if you're in a more mixed environment with people who don't look like you, you will have more understanding. And that stops you in acting in a certain way. So again, it's the more you mix, the better things are.
So a combination.
I think.
A combination
It's a combination.
So a combination of...
I think it's time. I think time, as the years go on, as new generations come through, it will become normal. Whereas in the 70s, it wasn't normal to have a black police officer in the police force. It was massively abnormal, and people react to that. That's human nature.
How did members of the black community act when they saw you as a police officer?
Some good, some bad.
Okay, you got these stories?
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know if you, I mean, I was called all sorts of names, Elliot. I was, head-butted by white bloke, black bloke. Black people might shout things at me that were exactly the same as white people shouting things at me, to be honest. But that's where I say you have to have a certain backbone, a certain steel a certain ability to overcome a bit of nastiness, really. Or go and pick fruit. If you don't like it, go and pick fruit.
Pick fruit.
Yeah, if it's too much for you in the police force, you can't pick fruit. Well, that's hard work. Picking fruit is hard work.
Dad, I remember having this discussion with you before. But how do you feel responsibility is weighted in the police? Do you feel that an individual police officer will be more, or have you seen police officers, for example, who are more responsibility to their fellow officer than to their job? So what I'm asking you is, do you find that police officers' loyalties can vary between being loyal to the job and loyal to commitment to justice versus loyalty to the fellow officer?
Well, when I joined, it was loyal to your team, your colleagues. That really was the be all and end all. You were part of a team, and as much as possible, you were looking out for each other. It wasn't too dissimilar to being in the army in the early 80s. So your loyalty was to each other.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying that's changed now because there's more of a code of conduct?
No, I think with social media and accountability, that's changed.
Right, okay.
Because nearly everything can be on video. You're so accountable that there was no CCTV when I joined Elliot. There was no mobile phones, no internet. There was, if you want to make a phone call, you had to go to a phone box. So now, police officers and the public are so accountable because everything is on video. But I wouldn't exaggerate the bad stuff we see.
What do you mean?
Although it's bad. But if you see, there's, on YouTube, you've got the clips of the police officers acting abhorrently. But that is due to just the ability of social media to capture nearly every bad bit of policing. And there are bad bits of policing. But
it sounds like what you're saying is that because the institution or because the police force has evolved so much for the good, that it sounds like you're saying you can now put the ownership of the bad deeds on the individual officer rather than on the institution itself.
I think if the institution protects the bad officer now, then it's the institution that's at fault, because everything is so accountable that there really shouldn't be. You'd be hard pushed to find an officer that would back up a bad police officer, because your job's on the line. I mean, with the body-worn cameras, CCTV, mobile phones, you'd have to be an idiot to join in that behaviour.
Also, remember,
although some do.
Yeah, go on.
Although some do, and that's where you get the examples on social media.
Also, remember you saying a little while ago now that when you first joined, the methods of promotion or your key performance indicators were how many arrests or how many convictions you got. Is that still the same?
Well, it was a lot. Well, the worst thing in my service that the police force did was put performance figures on stop and search. They were literally saying, go out and I want 10 stops and searches. All right, you were judged if you wanted to move on your activity, which more or less led people to manipulate instances where they could satisfy their bosses. That's what I saw, which to me was stupid.
So you'd see people stop and search for, and we spoke about this before, right? Where you'd see police officers conduct a stop and search on very, very shaky grounds, very subjective grounds.
Well, there's been reports. I can't remember the percentage, but a very high percentage of stop and searches were illegal. The grounds were totally wrong. Just wrong. Full stop. You couldn't even begin to justify. I can smell cannabis, so I'm going to search you. I mean, it's just rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
So what you had was manufactured reasons to engage in stop and search.
Does that continue today still, or is it less likely?
No, I think it still continues today. Not on the level that it was when I joined, but I would still say that if you're having to manufacture a reason or invoke suspicion through certain behaviour, because the reasonable grounds threshold that you need to get to stop and search someone isn't there, you're on dodgy ground.
How do you feel this?
I'm sure.
How do you feel this shapes the relationship between the police and the public? Because is this something that could be amended?
Well, it's bad. It's going to be bad. Stop and search is such a incendiary power that the police have got. If you use it in the wrong way and you're found to be lying, or you get it wrong, or you're on video and you're seen to be getting it wrong, it's incendiary. It's one of the things that is going to be, it's going to really do damage to the police reputation. I've always thought that.
Why do you feel that a disproportionate amount of black people are stopped and searched in comparison to non-black people?
I think it's a lot of reasons. I think there's an element of some people, especially in my time, saw black people as the enemy. They saw black people as distrustful, as with a criminal mentality, as lazy, whatever the negatives were, which then very, very easily leads to you in uniform viewing a group of people in a negative light, which then justifies how you treat them. Now, I don't think there's any excuse. And the key element of the stop and search is the reasonable grounds. That's the big word. What is reasonable? Now, it's not reasonable to invoke that you can smell cannabis to search somebody because you don't like the look of them. But that might happen. And there you see where the conflict starts. But it doesn't happen. I'd like to think it doesn't happen anywhere near on the level of the 70s and 80s. In fact, Elliot, I can guarantee you it doesn't.
And
it just doesn't. Not
so basically what you're calling for is a focus on the objective rather than the subjective. So the more that an individual has concrete evidence or concrete suspicion, then the racialized element will be taken out of it, because an objective reason is an objective reason.
Yeah. And it's got to be targeted. It's got to be truthful, to be honest, and it's got to be reasonable. I keep going back to reasonable. It's not reasonable to just look at someone, how they're dressed, and decide that you want to stop and search them.
Mm-hmm. They've got another friend, Chris Wright, who's a police officer in Kent Police, and this is his question. Right. Michael Fuller.
They're not very good, you know. They're not very good. They're not very good.
So Michael Fuller strived to make Kent Police an anti-racist organisation and made huge accomplishments, but felt that there were some marginalised parts of the community that wouldn't adhere. So basically he's saying that there's some parts of the community or some parts of the police force that didn't adhere to anti-racist policies or anti-racist motivation. Does your father feel every force is able to adopt an anti-racist service? And what are your thoughts on what could be done to move and drive this further?
That's the longest question in the world.
I can break it down for you if you want. I know you're retired. I can break it down.
No, go on. I think my dementia's
it's the rum.
No, go on.
Okay. So basically, do you feel that an anti-racist or an anti-racism objective is a good objective in the police force today?
I wouldn't label it as such.
Why so?
I would label it something softer. I think people, they resist. As soon as you use harsh language, people resist. They go, well, I'm not like that. That's not me. But it's the subtleties of behaviour that you want to change.
Okay, so
does that make sense?
what you're saying is that by calling it anti-racist, there's almost like an accusatory element to it, like you're automatically accused. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in doing so, do you feel that? Because I can imagine that. I can imagine being a professional, especially if I take my profession very seriously as I do. If someone was to automatically accuse me, or if someone was to make me have to automatically roll out an anti-racist protocol, that would make me feel quite.
Yeah.
Right.
It's no good. It's no good. Because you're accusing the people you want to subtly change. Psychologically, that people they'll resist that. You get a lot more for honey than you do for salt. You get a lot more by gentle persuasion. You get Elliot, when I joined the police force, the majority of people, I was the only black person they knew.
Right.
They'd never met a black person before. And it's only with that, oh my God, you've got A-levels. Do you know what I mean? Is that as you get to know people, people gently change. You can't, I don't believe you can you can just ram a big pole of racism in someone's face and say change.
How about that though? Because that's almost like what you're saying is that you have to be, as an ethnic minority, you have to be the sacrificial lamb in the sense of.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you
that's
do.
what you think.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So that's not very uplifting for a lot of people of ethnic minority to hear.
No, I know. but when you're 3% of the population, if you want change, you've got to be stronger than the idiots you're trying to change. You have to be stronger than them. You have to be above their behaviour. And you could call it a sacrificial lamb. But as a black person, if there's any black people or Asian or whatever listening, you will know that when you encounter such behaviour, you almost have to be a stronger person mentally. Or you'd end up just punching people in the face.
Did you ever find that quite... Did you ever find that quite stressful? Did you ever... I mean, you must have... Right, okay.
It's stressful. It is stressful. It is stressful. It's 30 years of 30 years. Sometimes I snapped. Sometimes someone did get punched in the face, colleagues. But you've got no choice. So you can cry in a corner, you can go and cry to your mummy, whatever you want to do, but you have to be a stronger, bigger, higher person to deal with what you're having to deal with.
Now,
you have to be.
Let me ask you like this. So, say if being an ethnic minority or being a specific minority, you have inherited disadvantage, right? So you've inherited disadvantage when it comes to job applications, when it comes to education, etc. Do you think that you play the part of being the sacrificial lamb and also bridge that gap of disadvantage? Because it seems like what you're saying is that you have to be able to take the hits, but can you take the hits and still catch up at the same time?
You've got to find a way of doing that, because the hits aren't going to stop. You haven't got any choice, because life's not fair, society's not fair. So you've got to find a way of.
But then, in saying that, how can I put this? Right. Okay. Right. That's what I'm saying. So, in saying that, should you not still try? So, but you're asking to not forcefully try and change people's perspectives. You're basically saying to lead a good example and let them do that.
Yeah.
Until they change their mind.
Yes. And when people are wrong, point it out. But to hit people with "you're a racist," people won't change.
But how?
But okay, let me give you an example. I was always far harsher on you and Jordan's behaviour when we were going out than I would be on other kids, because you had to behave in a certain way, because I knew you'd be judged if you didn't. So your behaviour has to be, in my mind, of a higher order, where people couldn't just pigeonhole you and say, well, typical, look at them, typical. So there's got to be a combination, and I've just read that from someone texting.
But how? My question to that is, how is that possible when, okay, so for example, the protests in London, right? We had a few misdemeanors. So protests around the country, a few misdemeanors. We've got one where the statue of Edward Colston was torn down. We've got another, which is the defacing of Winston Churchill's statue. Another where a police force force. And then we've got another, which is where a police officer during the protest was assaulted. So there's 4 different examples. Now, from the conversations that I've had with a lot of individuals, they immediately assume all misdemeanors to be committed by black people, when in reality, only one was.
Mm.
what I'm asking is, how
Yeah.
can you lead? How can you play the act of leading by good example when people immediately associate bad examples with you anyway, even if you weren't associated with them in reality? It,
But those people, those people can't be they can't be reached.
right,
Elliot. I wouldn't waste my time trying to change those
right, okay.
people because they're so far down the rabbit hole. They're just going to believe the badness and the negative. So some people, you can't change their mind, but there's a large chunk of people who kind of we've all met the people go, oh, I didn't realise, and they're open to persuasion. And it's those people that you're interested in.
So you're saying go after the low-hanging fruit, to go after the people who are willing to change.
Yes, yes. And to be honest, that comes from education, Elliot, for me. An educated population is a better population. You can't, I believe a lot of people have been educated into ignorance in this country.
National curriculum?
The education system, the national curriculum needs to change because what people are learning, most of it, especially in history, it's not true. Well, so Captain Cook was a hero. He discovered New Zealand. Christopher Columbus discovered America. All of these falsehoods. The Industrial Revolution was built on the back of cotton and raw materials coming from other places. But that's not taught. But educated people find it very difficult to act in an illogical, stupid way. And the media, the media's at fault for a lot of what they put out that, for me, that twists people's mind. But there's no point trying to change people's minds who don't want to be changed.
What do you think would happen if people were given a true depiction of British history? Because for it to be the way it is, there must be a strength to it. There must be a reason to keep it the way it is. So historically, we might say that it empowered the aristocrats because they were able to give a nation national pride and were able to basically do so without admitting the sins of the past. So what do you...
Well, if you started with the next generation and the education was, say, the truth, for want of a better word, everyone was taught more or less as historical truths, I think people would be happier. Because I think a lot of people, they're a prison to thinking that they're superior. This country is better than this country. We're all better because of exceptionalism. We're the best at this. And it turns out we're not the best at a lot of things. We're all right. We're average. We get on by, but we're not the best at, whatever. It's certainly not football. But that exceptionalism, I think, is built into people. And I think if you tell people the truth, they're happier.
We've got Faye who's asking a question. Faye says she's interested to hear your dad's insights, and thanks for the work that you've been doing, bringing Stephen Lawrence's murders to justice. What did in fact, could you tell the people watching about the significance of Stephen Lawrence and what it meant to you to put his murderers behind bars?
Well, the significance of Stephen Lawrence, murdered 1993, April 23rd or 22nd, I think. The significance was that the police were found out to not really be interested in investigating his murder as it should. But be under no illusion, there'd be plenty of other murders like Stephen Lawrence, white and black, that the police, through class, weren't really that interested in investigating. But the Macpherson report put a spotlight on bad practices in the police. And what came out of it was a complete change in how the police investigated murders. And I know I said we're not the best in the world, but when it comes to murder investigation, I'd say that the British police, the detective side, is one of the best in the world at investigating murders.
Why is that, do you think?
The technology, the expertise, the training, the enthusiasm to get a result as people would say. It's the murder investigation part of the police force, I would say, second to none in this country. Second to none.
Do you think that's a deterrent in itself? The fact that you're far less likely to get away with murder in England in comparison to other countries?
No, I don't think we're inclined. I don't think we're inclined to murder people like in the States. Life is cheap, and we haven't got guns. You know, we're not unarmed. We're not a violent population. We're not a violent people. When you compare us, you know, go to South America, Chile, lots of parts of the world where life is cheap. Over here, murder is still it's a very low crime rate.
If you were to change anywhere between 1 to 3 things about British society in any domain, what would you change?
Yeah. Every child should learn to play a musical instrument.
Why?
Because I think because I would want it. Every child, because it gives you wait. It gives you a focus. It's something that you can explore, you can lend your life to. A musical instrument. Every child. Even if it's a recorder, but every child must learn a musical instrument.
Yeah, what else? Jordan said classic. Jordan said classic.
What would I change? Do you know, I don't think we're that bad as a society. I really don't. It's not perfect, but I really don't think. I think people are angry. I'd limit their media time on these networks. I would, because I just don't think it's healthy. Let me put it this way: when we were growing up in the 70s, you never saw, unless you were brushing your teeth, you never saw what you looked like. No one did. Because in order to see what you look like, you'd have to take a picture, send the film off. 2 weeks later, you'd get the film back, you'd look at a picture. So we never had that obsession with what we look like. But now, you can't move. I mean, look at me now. I'm looking at me, talking to you. And it's a bizarre way to be.
It's disturbing. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Learn a musical instrument: piano, saxophone, flute, guitar. Learn to play.
All right, sweet. I'll do that. I was going to just quickly check to see if we've got any more questions, Dad. Otherwise, I think that might be it.
Can I show you my dog?
Yeah, you can put your dog on. Go for it.
Tell it. Is that it? Say hello, Elliot.
Oh, we've got a question from your daughter. So Jordan asks, I have heard, one second, she asked, I've heard a lot of other races say that I've heard a lot of other people say that other races should step forward to help black people. Do you agree, or you think that's right? Okay.
Yes.
Why so?
Yes.
Why so?
Yeah. Because white people can't do it on their own, black people can't do it on their own, no matter what the issue is. It shouldn't, what's wrong is wrong and what's right is right. It shouldn't just be the people who are I don't like to use the word oppressed. It shouldn't just be the people who are feeling the heat that stand up. Everybody must stand up because everybody knows what's right and wrong. So we either do it together or we don't do it at all, because everybody has to stand up.
What are your opinions on the protests at the moment? Do you think that they're just? Do you think they're reasonable? Do you think that they'll go anywhere?
I think they're just. Sometimes I think, come on now, I want to watch something else on the telly, if I'm honest. I think, oh, come on, just get, I'm feeling it. If I was younger, I would be involved in the protests. I think they're great. And I think that the killing of that, I've never seen something so so upsetting, to be honest with you, is the way that that bloke was killed in America. I think that really touched a lot of people. And it matters that he was black because that's the focus. But sometimes I look at it and I think, it's just rank behaviour from a police force to the public, which is exaggerated because of the racial issues.
Do you think that, you know, the amendments that you stated when it comes to British police are just being better critical thinkers to assess our own bias as individuals, do you think that that is the only resolution that's needed for the American police, or do you think it's going to take more than that?
No, I think the only thing I think we've got in common with America is that we speak the same language. I believe they're a different breed of nation. They're violent people. They love the gun more than they love their kids. They love eating fat more than they love eating an apple. That they are so, to me, they're a strange people. To me, I wouldn't compare us to America, ever. I'd like to compare us to Sweden or Norway or Belgium or Germany, but never America. They're strange, but strange people. There's a lot of good in America. There's a lot of good stuff, but my God, the bad is bad. The good is really brilliant, and the bad is really, really bad. Really bad. Yeah, they're nuts. They're nuts. I mean, why do you need 4 or 5 guns? I don't understand it.
I don't. I think that's all the questions. I think we've literally got through them all, yeah. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to add.
I look old. I'm sitting there looking at myself and I look
You've got as dark as
yeah, I know.
Claire says now, not all Americans. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I didn't say all. I never said all. As Claire knows, I'm talking in general. In general. Claire's been willfully ignorant, willfully misunderstanding. Naughty, Claire. Naughty.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add there?
No, this is good. I mean, I'm surprised. I'm new to all of this. That's good.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah. Have you got? Here's a question for you. How do you feel about being British and growing up in this country? How do you feel?
In what domain? In what sense?
In the domain of, all right, is there another country that you wish you lived in?
Sometimes of the year.
If the answer, no, not for the sun, but for society, for life.
I'd like to live in Jamaica during British winter. I'd say I have to say this. Go into more Arabic countries or more Muslim countries. So Egypt, Morocco, Turkey. I've heard especially about Istanbul. And also going to Jamaica. It made me realise how much of a racialised society we grow up in, or we are in. And I don't think you can see England until you step outside of England to somewhere which is very, very un-English. So that would be
right. But
yeah,
But the problem is that England has got so much more diversity.
No, yeah, but it's right. It's still secular. It's still secular. So, for example, in Morocco, you will see two Arabic-looking individuals and one might have some different features, but then their child looks like me. Or you might have an owner of a restaurant who's African, and there's Arabs who are serving, and vice versa. It's they don't see race, and I will say that going to these countries, it is like I can take a deep breath for the first time, purely based because it's so refreshing.
Yeah, but do you think that's because it's very difficult, and this is where psychologically I think both white people and black people don't take into account how difficult it is to always be the minority. You're always
there's the minority. But then at the same time, England has been racialized. We've got like 10 seconds left. What I'll do, Dad, is because I think it's quite interesting.
No.
I'll sign off now, and then I'll do another live. Just jump on and I'll answer this question. Dad, it's not a case of just not being an ethnic minority. It's the fact that these countries, they don't see race anywhere near. They don't see race at all. Like, I even remember Googling racism in Morocco, and literally nothing came up. There was.
Oh, that's right. Wait. I see what you mean. I understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree with it.
Yeah. So.
I understand what you're saying.
But I think to create this, the national curriculum has to become a lot more globalized. The national curriculum has to celebrate and acknowledge the good and the bad in all people. Like, why?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, even something like doubt has to be instilled in the people's minds, and they have to look even at their own heroes critically. I mean, for example,
Yes.
yes, 100%. You can say he masterminded the strategy, and let's just keep it at the strategy to win the World War for Britain.
Yeah.
Participate in that.
Yeah.
He didn't put his neck on the line. He was a leader, right? So let's say that he.
Yeah.
But he did lead. He also caused the death of 3 million Bengalis and also millions of Kenyans as well during genocide. He was the concentration camps during the Boer War were also his brainchild.
Yeah.
That has to be acknowledged.
But yes, it does, and that's when I'll come back to just telling the truth about history.
Right. I mean,
that's hard.
Yeah, go on.
No, I'd agree with you on it. Did Danusha tell you to ask that question?
No, but there was another question by Liam. Liam asked, where is he? He kept on asking a question before. 1 second. The question was, where is it? Danusha, if you're watching, can you answer it? If you can say what the question was. I think the question was, do you think that police training could be improved?
Yes.
In what sense?
Yes. I know this is going to sound really wacky. I would send every person who's going to join as a young police officer to go and live with someone in the community for a week. Yeah, the difference in mindset of feeling part of or getting to know people for a week, that's what I was coming back to. If you have to mix with different people, your mindset changes. You can't help but change. And I think that's just one example. Just for 1 week of your life, you go and come and live with me. Come out, you go, just with a different family. And I think you'd have a better policeman because there'd be that connection, which is very difficult. What you've got to bear in mind is that a lot of police officers, when I joined, they'd never been to London before. They come from Cornwall or Devon or Wales, and it's very difficult to come to a city with the values of, say, Cornwall in the 70s and police a city like London. That's going to be very, very hard.
I was talking to a patient the other day who, first of all, he took his degree in law and he studied law, but then went into more corporate law or commercial law, didn't really like it because he wanted to help people, and he decided to work to become a police officer instead. So he joined the police at the age of 30, and he's also an ethnic minority. I think his dad from Mauritius, and he said exactly the same thing. He said that, first of all, growing up in the 80s was awful, very, very vicious. But he also said that he would like to see more police present in schools, so actually interacting with schools. More police on the beat again. But police on the beat, not police a society, but to interact with the society and to ask people how to do. Basically, so people can view in a good light, so that people can view the police the best, and at all that time they've got to use their powers, I suppose.
Yeah, fully agree. Totally agree. I mean, nothing but good can come of that. But then when you put in performance indicators on a police officer, let's say you've got a police officer who's in the community, he's walking around, all day, talking to the shopkeeper, the postman, you, the kids at the school. He does that all day, and everyone gets to know him. He could be judged really harshly on, well, what have you done? What have you done today? How many tickets have you given out? How many burglars you caught? But policing is so much more than that. It's almost unquantifiable when you're doing a good bit of police work. The bit about arresting people and charging is such a small part of police work. It's a social interaction. You want people who you would feel comfortable your kids talking to, or if they're in trouble. And that's something that unfortunately has been ripped away.
Why do you think it's been ripped away? Is that via the cuts?
I just think society's changed, and I think the way people are judged has changed. I mean, I'm a Labour supporter, but Labour weren't very good. The Conservatives are worse, in my opinion. It's all about money. If you want a service, you have to pay for it. Society has to pay for it. And it's almost like a contract between society and the police service. One helps the other, and vice versa. But what you can't have, I don't think, is police officers just driving past you in cars all day, answering calls and never talking to anybody. The sort of police service you want is one that is old-fashioned in a way. Now, it might not be more effective, but it makes people feel better.
When would you say the police were at their best then? Or do you think they're at their best today?
When I joined. When I was in.
When you joined? You mean by the time that you stopped? You mean by the time you retired?
No, I think my best years were at Peckham, and shortly when I went on to Trident. But my best years were at Peckham. I thought we were great. I don't know if we were rubbish. I don't know if I was getting everything wrong. But in uniform, Peckham in the 80s, I felt that the police force, take aside the prejudice and all the rest of it, it was a more innocent police force, but with rougher edges.
Why do you think that the police was at its best then?
Because it was more interactive. You had to walk, you had to talk to people. Despite the problems, you had lots and lots of police officers walking, talking, interacting in the schools, community police officers. But that's very expensive. And if you try to quantify what was a good police officer or a bad police officer, it's very difficult to do. As soon as you introduce figures into the equation, you're taking away the human element, I believe.
What was your most fondest memory in the police?
Stephen Lawrence case.
And why is that?
Oh, it was like theatre. It was history in the making. It was to be in the courtroom for the 3 months that the trial went on, to be involved in finding the DNA. Well, I didn't find it, obviously, but the scientists found it. To know that something so iconic you could be part of solving was, for me, it's just never going to get any better than that.
Mm-hmm. All right, then. Before we finish, any other questions or anything else that you'd like to say?
Do you want to see my dog again?
Go on then.
There he is. There he is. Say hello. Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care. Be good.
Take it easy. Thank you.
Behaviour.
No problem.
All right.
Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.